All right, so I wanted to do a video on some putting concepts. To give you a little background, probably the past 7, 8 years of my personal golfing career, I've had some putting issues. So anybody that's watching this that can relate to that, um, yeah. So like, hey, as a golf instructor, I'm curious to find the answers as to why I'm not putting as well as I think I should be or could be. And that's kind of led me down a rabbit hole of really figuring it out. And I would say in the past 4 or 5 years, I've started to understand a lot better about what actually moves the needle in putting. Um, and just kind of wanted to talk about a couple of those concepts today because this is something that's been ruminating in my mind for a long time. I'm teaching it every day. There's some things that I'm finding that are working better than others. And along with some research that I've come across, it seems to kind of all culminate to starting to figure this thing out a little bit more. I would like to say that I've completely figured it out from a playing perspective. That wouldn't be totally true, but I have no doubt improved my putting through this, and I've definitely seen an improvement in my coaching from a putting standpoint because of some of these concepts and the way that I'm thinking about them. And some of them may be a little bit different, or maybe even controversial to what you've potentially heard in putting in the past, and what's still in putting instruction um, today. So there's three things we have to do to putt well. The first being speed control, the second being green reading, and the third being start line. Okay, so like those are the kind of three ingredients to determine if we're going to putt well or not. In my experience, and through some data that I've seen as well for some people that are a lot smarter than me, it seems to be that start line, there's less of a difference between good putters and bad putters on start line than there is between good putters and bad putters when it comes to green reading, and then even more so speed control. It seems to be the separator in making you a good putter would be speed control number one, green reading number two, and then a much further down the list, but probably a bit better, would then be start line control or start line management. There's definitely some golfers that really struggle with that, but from my experience, it doesn't tend to be the place that is going to move the needle the most. And as a coach, that's what I'm trying to decide. It's like, hey, what are the things that I can do to get the most improvement in the least amount of resistance, right? In the easiest way. And that's always a tricky thing. It depends on the person, but the big data would suggest, and my own anecdotal experience would suggest, that hey, if we have a limited time of practice, which most amateur golfers do, and they don't practice putting anyway, let's spend our time on things that are going to move the needle the most. And to me, that's going to be speed and green reading. Okay. I think putting's super interesting too, because there's no reason that anybody in the world, as long as you can essentially hold a putter, could be the best putter in the world. Like, not everybody can hit 300-yard drives, but theoretically, anybody could be the best putter, the Tiger Woods of putting. So I think that's kind of intriguing from a coach standpoint, too, is that, hey, I can theoretically get anybody to be the best putter in the world. I think the tricky part about putting is that it's very binary. Like, I can hit a drive and it not be perfect, but still be very functional and very playable. Let's say I hit it on the heel a little bit, it spun a little more, it went 15, 20 yards less, but it didn't really curve too much, and it's still kind of in play or in the fairway. And like, hey, it's still considered a good drive. Like, from a strokes gain perspective, if I hit one 15 yards short and it's still in the fairway, that's still actually gaining shots relative to my ability level. Okay. Versus putting, especially like when we start getting into makeable ranges, which maybe we'll talk about, it's binary. It's either miss or make. And there's a bunch of things that can go on that are necessarily not in our control that can make us miss putts. Like, hey, I just hit something. Or we got the speed like very, very small off. And I've found through doing this a bunch that if the speed's a little bit off, the putt has no chance. So that is really hard. We kind of inherently know that speed control is really hard to control. Okay, that's a difficult task to be able to do. So that's what I want to spend this video mainly talking about is speed control, and maybe thinking about it in a little different, through a little different lens of what traditionally we've kind of heard of, hey, speed control. So the first thing to define is like what actually affects how much the ball rolls. Well, the only things that we can really control, the factors that would go in there would be speed of the putter head at impact, okay, and then where we hit it on the face, and the way the ball rolls. So like the skid roll kind of stuff. The good news is, according to most research that I've seen, and this is people like Sasha McKenzie. I think Ping did a study with Pope, where, hey, the skid roll stuff doesn't really matter from a management of speed perspective. I would say as long as it's somewhat predictable, I don't really care if the ball's skidding more than another person. Okay, as long as it's somewhat consistent, so to speak, and we're not doing different things with different putts, then it's probably not a huge needle mover. Okay, and even if the ball is skidding or rolling differently, it's not actually making that much of a difference in how much the ball is going to roll out. Like it's a pretty small percentage. Um, Also, would be like impact location. Sasha's definitely pointed this out quite a bit, but like, hey, it doesn't really matter if we hit the putter off center that much. And then, secondly, most players don't hit it off center enough to make a difference. Like, people are not hitting the ball way out here, especially with modern putters, like high MOI putters, like the one I'm holding here. Like, we're not missing it off the center that much by that big of a degree. And when we do, it happens so very, very little. And also, it doesn't really matter that much. Okay. It doesn't matter a little bit. Yes. But I think Sasha has shown that it's only like if you miss it, basically, this rarely happens, but if you miss it like a centimeter or more off center, it's going to affect the rollout by like 1% to 2%. Like, that's not a big deal. Like, it's way harder to control speed variance, the speed of the club head, 1% to 2% than it is to be able to do this. So, again, in my mind, if you have a limited time to practice, you're probably not going to worry too much about where we're hitting it on the face, okay? What are some things that we can do to get better at predicting and being able to manage the ball rollout, okay? So, all right, so there's speed. So literally, I've gotten rid of the two factors, and there's really only one left. So the speed of the putter head at impact. I like breaking that down and do a couple different ways to think about it. So you can either think about the length of the stroke or the speed of the stroke. And then a third factor that I like to consider that's maybe a little bit different is the time. Okay. So the way that I think about it, and I teach a lot of people, and this is coming from smarter people than me as well, have pointed this out to me, is trying to keep time the variable that stays the same. Okay. So typically, from some of the research that I've seen and anecdotal testing that I've done as well, good putters will typically have a similar amount of time from the moment their club head goes away from the ball to the back of the swing, and then from the back of the swing to the follow through. Okay, those tend to be pretty one-to-one relationship. Again, just to be clear, I'm talking about from start of breakaway to end of backswing, from end of backswing to follow through. Okay, not from start of breakaway to backswing and then to ball. That would be more in like the 2-to-1 ish range. There's some variance there, of course, but it would tend to be 1-to-1 from here to here and from here to here. Okay, what's really interesting is that what I tend to see as well is no matter the length of the putt, the overall stroke time stays pretty similar. So again, the variable that we're controlling or not changing in much of is the time. So what I mean by that again is backstroke time to forward stroke time is similar. And then the overall time between different distances of putt also stays pretty darn similar. So just to kind of show an example of that, I have a stick here and I just have reference point for stroke length. And all I'm going to do is try to keep the time the same. The way that I do that, the reference point that I have is by using words. Okay, so my word is a 2-syllable word. The first time someone ever asked me to do this, I said donut. So it's going to be look like this. It's going to be donut, donut. Okay, donut, donut. And then I have reference points on this stick that is going to be the variable that changes, that is length. Okay, so I'm keeping time the same. I'm changing the length, so therefore I have to change the speed in order to keep that time the same between different stroke lengths. Okay, does that make sense? So on a 10-foot putt, it would look something like this, donut, donut. On a 20-foot putt, it would look something like this, donut, donut. And on a 30-foot putt, it would look something like this, donut, donut. Okay, so I'm obviously changing the length and the speed both, but I'm not thinking about changing the speed. What I'm trying to do is keep the time the same and just change the length of the stroke. And I have found for me personally and for my students that that's a way better way to think about it than, hey, let's try to keep the speed, just think about speed. I don't think we have a great conception of that always. Okay, so if I was hitting a 10-foot putt, that would look about like this, donut, donut. Okay, and that ball is going to travel about 10 feet. Now, in order to hit a 20-foot one, I'm just going to make the stroke a bit bigger. It's about a club head length-ish. It's a little more than that for me. But now I'm just going to keep the time the same. So it's still donut, 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 donut. And now the ball travels 20 feet. Okay. It's really cool how this can affect things and how good we can get at it managing the differences in the pace while doing that. So, again, just to review, let's not worry about impact location. Let's not worry about how the ball's skidding or rolling. Let's not worry about face technology that's on the face. Let's not worry so much about lines that are on the putter head. Those things matter in a very, very micro sense, but probably don't matter that much in a macro sense. If we want to get better at putting, we probably need to focus on these other things first. Okay? And speed control is going to be a massive factor in that. And if we can think about it maybe in a little bit different way through a different lens of time, I have found that maybe that helps people get a little bit better at managing that speed.